Jim Jones founded the People's Temple in the 1950s, presenting it as a progressive movement dedicated to equality and social justice. He attracted thousands of followers, particularly those seeking community and acceptance. For many, the temple provided a sense of belonging that mainstream society had denied them. On the surface, it looked like a utopian vision come to life. Behind the scenes, however, Jones ruled with manipulation and fear. He demanded complete loyalty, using intimidation and staged miracles to maintain control. As the movement grew, accusations of abuse and corruption began to surface. Jones responded by isolating his followers further from outside influence. In the late 1970s, Jones moved his community to Guyana, establishing Jonestown as a supposed paradise. But life there was far from idyllic. Members lived under constant surveillance, with armed guards patrolling the camp and Jones delivering rambling sermons through loudspeakers day and night. The nightmare culminated on November 18, 1978, when over 900 people died in what became known as the Jonestown Massacre. Under Jones's orders, his followers consumed cyanide-laced drinks in a chilling act of mass murder-suicide. It remains one of the deadliest cult tragedies in history, and Jones's name is forever linked to manipulation and destruction. Charles Manson emerged in the late 1960s as the leader of a group later called the Manson family. He attracted followers by presenting himself as a prophet who blended ideas of spirituality, free love, and apocalyptic prophecy. To vulnerable young people disillusioned with society, he seemed to offer guidance and purpose. Manson preached about an impending race war, which he called Helter Skelter. Borrowing the term from a Beatles song, he convinced his followers that they had a role to play in igniting this conflict. Through drugs, isolation, and psychological manipulation, he exerted a dangerous level of influence over his so-called family. The cult's infamy came to a head in August 1969, when Manson ordered his followers to commit brutal murders in Los Angeles. Among the victims was actress Sharon Tate, who was 8 months pregnant. The killings shocked the world with their sheer brutality and seemingly senseless nature. Manson never personally carried out the murders, but his orchestration of the crimes led to his conviction and life imprisonment. He became a symbol of the dark side of the counterculture movement, and his name remains synonymous with violence, control, and madness. David Koresh, born Vernon Howell, rose to prominence as the leader of the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas. He claimed to be a prophet chosen to unlock the hidden meanings of the Bible. With his charisma and intense preaching, Koresh persuaded followers that he alone held divine truth. Koresh demanded absolute obedience, and life within the compound revolved around his teachings. He enforced strict rules, including control over marriages and sexual relationships, often taking young women as his spiritual wives. His followers lived under rigid discipline, convinced they were part of God's final plan. The group drew national attention in 1993 when U.S. authorities investigated reports of weapons stockpiling and abuse within the compound. What began as a raid by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms turned into a 51-day siege involving the FBI. The standoff was broadcast worldwide, with negotiations dragging on as tensions mounted. It all ended tragically on April 19, 1993, when a fire consumed the compound after authorities launched an assault. More than 70 Branch Davidians, including children, died in the flames. For many, Koresh epitomized the dangers of unchecked power, religious fanaticism, and blind devotion. Shoko Asahara, born Chizuo Matsumoto in Japan, became one of the most infamous cult leaders in modern history. He founded Aum Shinrikyo in 1984, blending elements of Buddhism, Hinduism, and apocalyptic Christian prophecies. Asahara claimed to be Christ reincarnated and convinced his followers that a world-ending Armageddon was inevitable. Under his command, the cult rapidly grew to tens of thousands of members, not just in Japan, but also abroad. What made Asahara particularly dangerous was his obsession with weapons of mass destruction. He sought to develop chemical and biological weapons, positioning himself as a prophet who would lead his followers through the chaos after nuclear war. This fixation led to one of the most shocking acts of domestic terrorism Japan has ever experienced: the 1995 Tokyo subway sarin gas attack. The attack killed 13 people and injured more than 6,000 commuters, horrifying the nation. Asahara's chilling ability to manipulate educated and otherwise rational individuals demonstrated the psychological power he held. Doctors, scientists, and engineers became loyal followers, helping him pursue his deadly vision. His reign of terror exposed how dangerous cult leaders can be when apocalyptic ideology meets access to advanced knowledge and resources. In 2004, after years of trials, Asahara was sentenced to death. He was executed in 2018, but the scars left by Aum Shinrikyo remain. His cult still exists today under a different name, proving how lasting his influence has been despite his demise. Marshall Applewhite, alongside Bonnie Nettles, co-founded the Heaven's Gate cult in the early 1970s. A former music professor, Applewhite transformed himself into a spiritual leader who preached that humans could ascend to a higher level of existence. He claimed that Earth was about to be recycled, and only those who followed his teachings could survive by shedding their human form and joining extraterrestrials. The cult lived under strict communal rules, cutting ties with family and embracing celibacy. Members even adopted identical clothing and hairstyles, erasing individuality in favor of group identity. Applewhite convinced them that salvation would come through a spacecraft trailing the Hale-Bopp comet in 1997. The culmination of Applewhite's teachings was catastrophic. In March of that year, 39 members of Heaven's Gate, including Applewhite himself, committed mass suicide in a rented mansion in California, creating one of the most surreal and disturbing scenes in cult history. What made Applewhite's leadership especially bizarre was how he merged science fiction with religious prophecy. His followers weren't just seeking salvation, they believed they were boarding a spaceship to transcend humanity. The tragedy of Heaven's Gate became a global symbol of how far manipulation and blind devotion can go. Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh, later known as Osho, was an Indian spiritual leader whose movement gained massive popularity in the 1970s and 1980s. He attracted followers worldwide with his teachings on meditation, free love, and breaking traditional social norms. However, beneath the surface of spirituality and liberation lay one of the most bizarre and controversial cult stories of the modern era. After relocating to Oregon in the United States, Rajneesh and his followers established Rajneeshpuram, a sprawling commune. It became infamous for its opulence, with Rajneesh himself amassing a fleet of more than 90 Rolls-Royces. While his followers lived communally, his extravagant lifestyle drew media attention and criticism, sparking conflict with local residents and authorities. The controversy reached a dark peak in 1984 when Rajneeshi leaders orchestrated the largest bioterror attack in U.S. history. Followers contaminated salad bars in the Dalles, Oregon, with salmonella bacteria in an attempt to sway local elections by incapacitating voters. More than 700 people fell ill, though no one died. This event shocked the nation and exposed the dangers hidden beneath Rajneesh's image of peace and spirituality. Eventually, Rajneesh was arrested for immigration fraud and deported. His movement splintered but continued to attract devotees even after his death in 1990. Today, Osho's teachings still circulate globally, often rebranded in spiritual and wellness circles, proving the lasting power of his message despite the controversies that defined his life. Son Myung Moon, the founder of the Unification Church, rose to global prominence with his controversial religious movement that mixed Christianity with his own teachings. Born in 1920 in what is now North Korea, Moon claimed to have had a vision from Jesus as a teenager, instructing him to complete Christ's unfinished work. In 1954, he established the Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity, later known simply as the Unification Church. Moon's followers, often called Moonies, became known worldwide for their mass wedding ceremonies, where thousands of couples were matched and married by Moon himself. These events were not only religious spectacles, but also media sensations. Moon's teachings blended traditional religious doctrine with his own vision of family unity as the cornerstone of world peace. However, the movement was surrounded by controversy. Critics accused the church of brainwashing recruits, exploiting members financially, and exercising extreme control over personal lives. Governments in several countries investigated the church, while mainstream religious groups condemned its teachings. Despite this, Moon built a vast empire that included businesses, newspapers, and universities. By the time of his death in 2012, his influence had spread across continents, and his legacy remains deeply polarizing. To some, he was a spiritual leader with a mission for global unity. To others, he was a manipulative cult leader who amassed power and wealth through control. If you're enjoying this deep dive so far, take a second to subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. And while you're at it, give the video a like and share it with someone who'd find this as fascinating as you do. Roch Thériault, a Canadian cult leader, created one of the most disturbing and violent cults in history, the Ant Hill Kids. Born in 1947 in Quebec, Thériault grew up in a strict Catholic household, but later turned toward apocalyptic religious visions. By the 1970s, he had formed a small commune in Ontario where he proclaimed himself a prophet. Thériault demanded absolute obedience, convincing his followers that the world was about to end and that only his guidance could save them. Under his leadership, the Ant Hill Kids endured brutal conditions, including physical abuse, forced labor, and isolation from the outside world. Thériault used fear and violence to maintain control, often inflicting severe punishments on members. What made his reign especially horrifying was his descent into extreme cruelty. He carried out sadistic medical operations on followers, amputating limbs and performing surgeries without anesthesia. Several people died under his control, and survivors described years of unimaginable abuse. Thériault was eventually arrested in 1989 and sentenced to life in prison for murder and other crimes. He died in 2011 after being attacked in prison. His cult remains one of the darkest examples of how charismatic leaders can twist faith into a nightmare of abuse and suffering. Elizabeth Clare Prophet rose to prominence as the leader of the Church Universal and Triumphant, a New Age religious movement that blended Christianity, mysticism, and apocalyptic prophecy. Born in 1939 in New Jersey, she became involved with the Summit Lighthouse, a group founded by her husband Mark Prophet, and took over leadership after his death in 1973. Prophet taught that she was a messenger for ascended masters, spiritual beings who guided humanity's destiny. She gained a devoted following, attracting tens of thousands of members worldwide with her teachings on reincarnation, personal transformation, and spiritual hierarchy. Her movement took a bizarre turn in the late 1980s when she began predicting an imminent nuclear war. Under her guidance, the church built vast underground bunkers in Montana stocked with weapons, food, and supplies. Families sold their homes and invested their savings to prepare for the apocalypse. When the prophecy failed to materialize, many followers were left disillusioned and financially devastated. Despite the failed predictions, Prophet continued to lead until health issues forced her retirement in the late 1990s. She passed away in 2009, leaving behind a controversial legacy. Some viewed her as a visionary spiritual teacher, while others saw her as a manipulative leader whose doomsday warnings exploited her followers' fears. Adnan Oktar, also known by his pen name Harun Yahya, became infamous in Turkey and abroad for blending Islamic teachings with conspiracy theories and creationist ideology. Born in 1956, Oktar gained attention in the 1980s for his writings against Darwinism, which he claimed was a tool of atheism and global corruption. He later built a powerful cult-like following around his persona. Oktar's group was as unusual as it was controversial. His inner circle included glamorous women whom he referred to as his kittens. These women appeared frequently on his TV programs, dressed in provocative clothing while discussing religious and political topics. The bizarre combination of conservative religious rhetoric with overt sexual imagery made his broadcasts notorious. Beyond the theatrics, Oktar's movement was accused of serious crimes. Turkish authorities alleged his organization engaged in blackmail, fraud, and sexual exploitation. In 2018, Oktar was arrested along with hundreds of his followers. In 2021, he was sentenced to over 1,000 years in prison on multiple charges, including sexual assault and running a criminal organization. His bizarre mixture of creationist preaching, conspiracy theories, and a flashy lifestyle made him one of the strangest figures in modern cult history. Hamilton-Byrne, the leader of an Australian cult known simply as the Family, orchestrated one of the most disturbing cases of child abuse and mind control in modern history. Born in 1921, she presented herself as the reincarnation of Jesus Christ and drew followers from professional and wealthy circles, including doctors, lawyers, and nurses. At the heart of her cult was the belief in preparing a chosen group of children for a coming apocalypse. Hamilton-Byrne acquired children through questionable adoptions and forced them to live under strict, isolated conditions. The children were dressed alike, had their hair dyed blonde, and were subjected to harsh discipline and psychological manipulation. Behind the cult's polished exterior of yoga, meditation, and New Age spirituality, horrific abuse took place. Survivors reported being drugged with LSD, beaten, and emotionally scarred. In 1987, police raided the group's property, rescuing the children and exposing decades of abuse. Hamilton-Byrne was arrested years later, but received only minor legal consequences due to her declining health. She died in 2019, remembered by survivors as a manipulative and cruel figure who used religion as a mask for abuse. The Family remains one of Australia's darkest cult scandals. Tony Alamo, born Bernie Lazar Hoffman in 1934, was an American preacher who built a ministry that devolved into a dangerous cult. Alamo first gained attention in the 1960s with his wife Susan, preaching a mix of fundamentalist Christianity and apocalyptic warnings. After Susan's death in 1982, Alamo's control over the group became more extreme. He convinced followers that his late wife would be resurrected, keeping her embalmed body on display for months. Over time, his teachings became increasingly authoritarian. He demanded complete loyalty, exploited members for free labor, and accumulated wealth while living lavishly. Alamo's ministry operated businesses that relied on unpaid cult labor, drawing scrutiny from authorities. The most disturbing revelations came from his abuse of young girls. In 2009, Alamo was convicted of transporting minors across state lines for sexual purposes and sentenced to 175 years in prison. Former members also described brutal punishments and indoctrination practices within the group. Alamo died in prison in 2017, leaving behind a legacy of manipulation, greed, and abuse. His so-called ministry, once broadcast on television and radio, is now remembered as one of the most exploitative cults in American history. If you found this exploration as shocking and fascinating as we did, make sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe to The Unknown Explained for more stories that uncover the darkest corners of human history. Which cult leader shocked you the most? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching. Stay curious, stay aware, and I'll see you in the next one.